Hi everyone and welcome to week 2 of Training Tuesday. Don't worry, we're not starting just yet. We'll start properly at the top of the hour, but we just thought we'd go into some reflections from last week. Carolyn, do you have any feedback, or how did you find it last week?
Oh, it was great fun and really helped having everyone's interaction in the chat room. So, yeah, looking forward to it again this week. Going on a slightly different topic this week. Um,
Right. So
yeah,
what are we going on to this week then?
we're on to attracting and retaining talent in the contact centre. So it'll be really interesting to find out if people are finding that more or less difficult over recent years because I'll get into it more, but kind of prior to the crash in 2008, it was quite competitive. It was literally you turn up for an interview, and if you're breathing, here's a headset. It's got now obviously things have changed slightly, and lots of people made redundant, and there's more people in the job market than before. But I think we still need to be quite selective about who we're letting in to speak to our customers.
So this is more going into, as we discussed last week, the rising stars and the stars and keeping them.
So we'll get on to retention as well. So we want to get people in at the front door who have got that potential and aren't going to be monkeys. And there's some management to do about the recruitment process to make sure we filter out those monkeys effectively. But then once we've got that good talent, how do we hang on to it? And how do we develop that through as a leader and a manager? What's my role in hanging on to that talent?
So last week we discussed kind of all the naughty monkeys and everything like that. Was
Yeah.
there any feedback that you were interested that people shared with everyone?
Yeah, I mean, there were some good conversations in the chat room after we finished broadcasting as such, which were kind of also about having monkeys at the higher levels as well. So not just advisor monkeys, but how do you manage upwards, which is challenging. It is very difficult, and it has to be managed quite carefully so that it doesn't appear unprofessional and like we're telling tales out of school. That was the conversation we were having, and it's quite difficult.
Yeah.
But really, for a contact centre to succeed, there needs to be strong leadership at the top. And if our delegates on this session are kind of sandwiched in the middle, that's quite challenging for them. So we'll certainly look at what we can do to help them manage that as we go through.
Yeah, I think what I learned was, what did I learn? The pressure of a live call. About using praise appropriately as well,
Yeah.
to make sure it's kind of used in the appropriate times, and I found that bit really enjoyable. I don't know about the
Yeah.
rest of the audience.
Yeah, praise is so important, and I do think that we take it for granted a lot of the time because we think, well, you're being paid, or that's your job, or I don't want to come across as patronising either. So I think sometimes we're a bit too reticent to use it, but it's really powerful, and obviously it's free. And I think as well, we often think that people are motivated by money, and it is true to some extent, but in all the research and surveys that are done about motivators, people want to feel like they're making a difference first and foremost. So finding the value is really key.
Yeah, I know that someone on the call mentioned how they had a rewards cupboard, so where people could kind of go in and select either a prize, so a mug or something like that, as
Yeah.
well as, we discussed on the call, days off or going home early and things, so different sorts of rewards.
Yeah, yeah. I was with a client last week actually, and we were talking about what their contact centre would value, and I talked about an early finish on a Friday, and it was like hysteria. They were like, "Oh my god, that would just be amazing!" So yeah, just getting raffle tickets for that, and it costs very little to allow one advisor to go home for a couple of hours, but it's huge.
Yeah.
And it incentivises everybody to want to compete for those raffle tickets, so it creates a buzz about that as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can
So
take quick wins.
Yeah. Any other suggestions for quick wins, do you think?
Well, based on what we were talking about last week, I would certainly be thinking about coaching, and how frequently we're giving feedback and having coaching conversations. Working with a client at the minute who's got quite a lot of home workers, and they're not having any conversations because they feel like, well, I can't drive 3 hours and have a face-to-face. So, we've been talking about just the importance of the manager picking up the phone just for a few minutes in the morning and saying, are you all set for a great day? And is there anything you need from me? And how are you feeling? And, let's check back in tomorrow and talk about how your day's gone. And just keeping them in touch and connecting with people, I think, is really important, no matter whether they're in the office or whether they're at home or how we're doing it. I don't think we do that enough.
Yeah. So do you think other problems come from home working agents from, what we were talking about last week?
Yeah, I think sometimes they are under the radar in terms of call quality, because nobody's spending the time actually sitting down with them and going through calls and having those conversations. So they've got to be included in that. But equally, I think sometimes we do miss a trick with coaching in the contact centre as such as well, because it's something that can take time and effort, and you have to sit down and fast forward and rewind and listen to calls and find something to have a conversation about, and probably targeted to do 3 per advisor per month or whatever. So it becomes a chore. But that's one of the things that if we get that right and we do it well, it can raise quality, and we can have more sales, we can have better customer service, customer retention, reduce complaints. So I think that's a huge win.
Yeah. So what do you think would be the kind of negatives of having home agents? I suppose not being able to see, if they are difficult or a monkey or anything like that, I
Yeah,
suppose.
yeah. I mean, obviously we're tracking when they're logged in, and how much time they're on calls and how much they're in Make Ready or Make Busy or whatever. So it's easy to track performance from that perspective. But I think quite often we do neglect that kind of team element, because I don't know about anyone else, but a big part for me about what I enjoy about contact centre life is the environment of being in that fun and what slightly wacky at times, team environment. And I think they miss out on that. So I think making them feel included is really important. But I think if we get the recruitment right, which is what we're going to be talking about today, and people's expectations are actually, I'm happy to sacrifice that environment thing because I don't want to sit in traffic for 60 minutes every morning and every night, they're quite happy with that. And I think we can actually get some great quality people to work in our contact centres through home working that perhaps otherwise wouldn't have taken a job in a call centre if it meant a 60-minute drive and sitting in a cube, and they don't want all that. So it's quite interesting to see that we're getting some talent through home working that wouldn't have otherwise wanted to do it.
Yeah, and I
So,
suppose you kind of need to recruit a mixture of people as well to
yeah.
make the call centre work, as it were. You do need some monkeys to keep the, some
Yeah.
entertainment and things like
Yeah.
that. But
Anyone who's watched the call centre on the BBC can see that, kind of chicken head and Griff and what they were like in terms of entertainment. Definitely, they did provide that.
I
Some
think it makes
headaches.
it more fun coming to work and things like that. Probably
Keeps them
more
in,
headaches for the team leader though.
keeps team leaders on their toes, definitely. Because I know what Griff was like with the quality guy, who sat down to do a call coaching with him, and there was a spelling mistake on the call quality framework. So I think Griff was like, well, how can you coach me about quality when you can't even spell something correctly? So yeah, keep you on your toes. But yeah, funny.
Well, I think we're just coming up to the top of the hour. For those of us for everyone who's just joined us, we've just been chatting about kind of last week's reflections, and obviously, keep sending in your feedback and everything like that. We like to read everything that we get sent in. A bit of housekeeping. You can download today's presentation slides. Sorry, they're in the top right-hand corner. It says download presentation slides, but they will be sent to you after the call, along with the recording. Obviously, the slides do appear on the PowerPoint Online section. Just let us know if there's any problems. Yes, and so over to Carolyn for attracting and retaining the best team.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Well, it's lovely to be back again, and I'd really like to find out from you all in the chat room how your week has been, and particularly what your reflections and results might have been in the last 7 days, if you've implemented what we discussed last time at all, if you've done your action plan, if you've been able to kind of categorise your advisor types a little bit, or think about using affirming or adjusting feedback. Have you been able to kind of think about your advisors in relation to what their skill level is like and what their willingness and motivation might be like? You know, have you had more one-to-ones and more feedback or more coaching as a result of what we discussed? Have you made a start, or have you revamped your skills matrix? So if you can just pop into the chat room your thoughts and feedback around that, it would be really good just to give you a minute on that and get some thoughts. So while you're doing that, I'll just kind of give you a little overview of what we're going to cover today as well, because this is about attracting and retaining the best team. So very much we'll be thinking about recruitment, the interview and selection process, and also how we hang on to some of those rising stars and stars that we were talking about last time. Hopefully you've all got the booklet and that you've printed that out, and you can follow along this session with that, make some notes. So have we got any thoughts in the chat room?
I think Jamie was typing. Oh, yep, he's typing. So I'll let you know when we have some feedback.
Okay, good. Yeah, it'd be good to hear from you all, because obviously the more interactive we are in the chat room, the more personal we can make this session for you. And if you've got any questions or anything that you want to share, then that is as valuable as what I'm sharing as well, because you're doing this all day, every day. So it'd be good to get that.
Yeah, Jamie said one thing I've taken from it is to find more time for team meetings and have more FaceTime with people.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah, we were just talking about that, weren't we, Rachel, before we started as such, and we were talking about home workers and how that can be a little bit challenging sometimes in terms of connecting face to face. But certainly if they're in the contact centre and they're near you, it should be fairly easy, and we need to take advantage of that as much as possible.
He's also said also some good ideas around incentives we're looking to implement, so that's great. And Kelly said I started to identify which staff fell into the different categories, so really working on the personality matrices.
Okay, good. Well, we're going to start to touch on personality a little bit more as well in this session, but particularly we're going to be thinking about it in relation to you. So what we will kind of cover in this session will be the 4 biggest recruitment mistakes that cost contact centres thousands every year. One thing you must definitely do to avoid staff turnover headaches, and this is absolutely critical. What the really simple secret is to having a happy team, and it's so straightforward. We just need to make sure we're doing it. The induction horror story that you won't want to repeat, and if you've downloaded the booklet and printed it out, you'll probably had a quick look at that on page 4, but we'll pick out some of the key points of that. And how to be the manager with the most stable and highest performing team that everyone wants to be on. Because I think sometimes it can be a bit challenging if you're the one who gets kind of past all the problem cases. So it's nice if you can kind of have people volunteering to be on your team who you actually would like to have on your team, rather than ending up with all the monkeys. So if you can have a think about this next question, and again tap your answers into the chat room. So what recruitment mistakes do you think contact centres make? So I said, I'm going to share with you what I believe are 4 of the biggest mistakes that I see in my work being made over and over again. But when you look inwards and you think about your current contact centre or contact centres you've worked in before, what recruitment mistakes do you think they are making? And then we'll get some of your ideas.
Oh, got a few people typing in their answers now, so we'll have a look. Remember, at any point, if you have any questions, as Carolyn said, please type them in. You don't have to wait until the end. We're always happy to be interrupted. Jamie says, disregarding people just based on their qualifications.
Okay. Yeah.
And Jonty said, filling roles just because we have a gap rather than waiting for the best candidate.
Yes, that's mistake number one. I'm going to cover in a moment. But yeah.
Yeah, got a few more people replying. Quick turnover on recruitment.
Yeah.
And Andy said, mis-selling the role to candidates.
That is definitely Andy, one that we're going to be covering in this session, because we touched a little bit last time on the psychological contract, and that is very much where that mis-selling occurs. So we'll have a look at that in more detail. It looks like the font on my slide has changed to what you're seeing, so apologies for that. It looks much prettier on my version. We'll see what we can do about that next time. Okay, so mistake number one is definitely not being choosy enough. So as Jonty said, and we were talking about this, weren't we, Rachel, as well, before we started, and kind of how times have probably changed a little bit. But it would be good to know how you're finding it in terms of ease of recruitment, because certainly prior to the financial crisis of 2008 and the triple dip recession, it was a case of if somebody turned up for a job in a contact centre, we were so desperate to get bums on seats that if they were breathing, we gave them a headset and they got the job. And of course that led to quite a lot of attrition and staff turnover. We had lots of contact centres all on the same business parks competing with each other for 50p an hour more. Someone would leave and go somewhere else. So we're kind of in this constant self-fulfilling prophecy of churning and desperation, which wasn't a very nice place to be. Now, fast forward, and a lot of people were saying during the recessions they couldn't get rid of the people that they would have liked to have left, who they probably would have lost through natural wastage, and now are staying and staying and staying, and they really wish they wouldn't. But the real kind of concern is when we're in perhaps a local demographic area where it is difficult to attract people. You saturated perhaps the local population quite heavily, so either they already have worked for you in the past, or they've got a reputation that you don't want them to work for you again. So what is your local talent pool like? Are you aware of where you're situated and what the demographics are for your region? And do you know what the competition is like locally to you? And are you being choosy enough? Are you attracting candidates who are good enough quality for you and putting them through a rigorous selection process? So it'd be, again, good to get people's thoughts on this mistake and whether they feel like their selection processes are delivering through a good fit for their contact centres, so people of the right calibre who are staying for 2 years at least, which is what we would be thinking would be a success story in this day and age. Or are you finding that actually it's a little bit of a desperate kind of knee-jerk reaction sometimes, and we give people the benefit of the doubt and we kind of cross our fingers and hope and pray that it'll work out, but 3-6 months down the line your kind of gut instincts are proven right, and then you end up with another vacancy to fill all over again. So it'd be good to get thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I think it was back to the previous question. Christine said not asking competency questions to understand how agents would act in certain situations. This is critical to truly learning about the candidate before making a decision.
Perfect. Yeah.
And Jonty said not realising that resilience is a key attribute, particularly if you have lots of customer complaints.
Yes, and this is where we'll get into this a bit with mistake number 3. where I think quite often we oversell the role, or we smooth over some of the negative elements and hope that they won't find out until it's too late, and they've accepted the job offer. So again, this all kind of goes back to, if we are desperate for people, it doesn't put us in the right foot, to kind of get the right quality candidates. So we need to understand, I know it's not easy to pick your contact centre up and move it into a place that is richer in terms of the local talent pool. So for example, in the UK, there are certain seaside towns that are really popular with the retired population. And actually, when you look at the demographic of contact centre agents in the UK, the biggest chunk of those are under 25. So if I was to be looking at where I was going to situate my contact centre, I'm not going to put it in Bournemouth or Southport, or somewhere where that doesn't match the demographic. But I understand that you won't be able to lift it up and move it. If you've made those sorts of decisions, you kind of have to live with them. So we need to think about what strategies you can put in place to help with that. And if you're finding that people are moving from your contact centre to a competitor for a very small amount of money difference, then it's worth building relationships with the HR managers in those different contact centres and agreeing together what might be a transparent framework of pay, so that we're not just passing people backwards and forwards and costing each other money. It's a great question to ask in the chat room, because do people know how much on average it costs to recruit and train a frontline agent to get them absolutely up to standard and live to go on the phones in their contact centre? Absolutely, it varies from place to place depending on what it is they're doing and how technical their knowledge needs to be for that. But it would be good to get a feel on what people think it costs them.
Roxanne has said, our recruitment team are keen to fill a seat as opposed to the right candidate. I mean, what would you do in that situation?
Well, this is it. So this is where data is really important to gather. So we'll talk about that as we go through. But one of the things that is really worth understanding is your own attrition rate, your own rate of unwanted attrition. So people that are leaving you that you would have preferred that they stayed. So they're the right quality candidate, but you're losing them. So if you can calculate your attrition rate and benchmark that against the industry averages, then that's quite powerful information to say, look, the industry average is 25% turnover, but we're losing 45%, and that is costing us XYZ. So we need to understand why that's happening. So definitely we'll talk a few about some of the sources of data that we need to tap into to be able to get that recruitment team really focused on what's important. And this is where recruitment ties in with retention, because if the rate of pay that you're salarying your advisors with is not competitive, then they'll churn quick. They'll go on and they'll find other jobs. They'll use it as a stopgap until they find something else that pays more, and then they'll go. And it does cost money, obviously, to recruit and train people up. So if I'm churning people based on the fact that I'm paying £3,000 or £4,000 less than the next equivalent contact centre, but it's costing me £9,000, that's the answer to my question. I was asking what does it cost on average. It's like half the first year's salary, which is on average around about the £9,000 mark. That doesn't make business sense, does it? I'm throwing away 9,000 to save 3 or 4. It doesn't add up. So that's where the recruitment team really need to get a handle on the numbers with that, definitely, and that they need to understand what's needed to work on the phones. Have they actually sat on the phones themselves and experienced what it's like, so that they can talk about that? Our team managers, so you guys involved with that whole recruitment process, or is it something that's handled separately and then you're just kind of given this person that turns up and they go, that's who we've got for you, ta-da, and it's like, okay, have you had any say in that whatsoever? So I think definitely the relationship is really important. Mistake number 2 is not rewarding competitively, which we've touched on. So certainly think about what salary you're offering and benchmark that against industry averages. There's loads of great white papers that you can download that will give you up-to-date data on what contact centres are paying in the UK. Mostly kind of the recruitment companies provide those. But it's not just about salary, it's also about the hours, the breaks, the shift patterns, the benefits, even facilities like car parking and smoking shelters, and just all the little perks can make a big difference. I know kind of one of our clients, their contact centre was filthy and really dirty and outdated, and one of the first things the new contact centre manager did was rip it all out and do a whole refresh on all the paintwork and the furniture and the potted plants and everything, just completely overhauled it. And lo and behold, his attrition went down because people were in a much nicer environment in which to work. He was able to attract people more easily to come and work there. They did little touches, like had a nice little breakout room with a little Sabutio football table for the boys and a little nail bar thing for the girls, or maybe it was the other way around, I don't exactly know. But that was the thinking behind it, was, you know, let's make it nice for people to work there. So definitely think about that, and it's down to things like flexibility as well, because quite often when people are coming to work in a contact centre, it's not always, and I'm still working on this, but it's still not always the career of choice. It's often something that people do for a time, either to fit around lifestyle or to earn a bit of money, or before they go to uni, or when they're looking for their next big career break, like Ollie Murs and Alan Carr. You know, they all worked in contact centres. So, you know, it's quite important that it's flexible. If I've got an audition or something else that I need to do, how flexible are you going to be with me? And that doesn't need to cost a lot of money, but it's really important to attracting great people. Can you imagine what Alan Carr, if anyone doesn't know him, like British comedian, is fantastic, what he would have been like on the phones? His AHT would have been awful, but it would have been great fun. Yeah, so proper chatty man. So definitely think about that. So mistake number 3.
We've actually got some feedback. Kelly said, we used to spend a lot of time recruiting each week, filling seats. However, this year we looked at our process. So we've changed this to recruit monthly and to have a selection event with anyone interested in the role. I'd say we spend around 10 hours on each member of staff, from recruiting them through to induction.
Kelly, that's brilliant. I love that. That's so much more thorough than kind of just turning up and having a quick chat and going, do I think they'll be all right, and kind of look them in the whites of the eyes and then give them a go and see what happens. And I think that is what Kelly's described is so much more robust and holistic. You're going to test out different things, you're spending that time with them, they're getting a proper feel of what it's going to be like to work there, and I think that will really save you a lot of money in the long run. It's definitely time well spent. So that's fantastic. So yeah, we talked about the psychological contract and the fact that sometimes people think they're coming to a certain type of role in a certain type of environment, and actually it doesn't turn out to be like that. And as Jonty said, you know, that whole resilience piece, kind of not understanding how hard it is to take 60, 70 calls a day, and only 10 of those people are nice and the rest are horrible, and doing that day after day. You know, it takes a special kind of person to be able to deal with that professionally. So definitely showing them the contact centre, letting them listen to calls is really important. And I think, as Christine said earlier about kind of the competency-based interviewing, you know, is really a key part of this. So we can get them to think about explaining times when they've dealt with difficult conversations and how they've diffused that as well. So this is about, I think someone said as well, not mis-selling or overselling the whole job in the recruitment process, because that might make it easier to get more people to say yes to you, but all that's going to do is cause churn when they find out that it's not really like that, which is why we've seen a lot of people leave contact centre jobs within the first 3 to 6 months. They give it a good go, they try to make it work, and then they go, I just can't do it. So I would rather they find it out up front, and that definitely will save a lot of hassle for you both and money. Any other thoughts on that one, Rachel, before I move on?
No, I think on to mistake 4.
Yeah, so this one is about not selecting thoroughly. So certainly, like Kelly's just said, you know, if we can do CVs and applications, telephone interviews, competency-based interviewing, as Christine said, assessment centres that allow people to kind of demonstrate their skills across a range of activities, and definitely think about avoiding bias. So not just going off your gut instinct and therefore recruiting clones of yourself, people that you get on well with, but certainly think about there being 2 or more of you working as a selection panel, and that you have a set of objective criteria and that you are scoring the evidence that you're seeing, so that ultimately when you make a job offer, you've got a really robust reason for doing so. But more importantly, when you reject somebody, if they were to question that, you can give them supportive feedback for future improvement, and you're also covering yourself against any possible comeback for people saying that they weren't given a fair shot in the recruitment process. So that's really important. So definitely no selection process is perfect, and the more varied you make the selection process, the better the chances of success are. And there's quite a lot of research out there about different methods that you can use, and certainly you can think about whether you want to do some psychometric testing, you know, and aptitude testing, depending on what the job is that they're going to be doing. There's a big question mark over using personality testing for recruitment, because it's seen as unethical to do that, but definitely competency-based interview questions that pull through evidence of past performance to give you the best predictor of future performance. That's really important, because certainly I think if we just ask people generic interview questions, they will give you generic best practice answers, which you don't know that that is what they are actually going to do in practice. And some people say that that is about as effective in terms of a strategy for recruitment as pulling somebody in at random off the street. So we could be wasting again a lot of time and money if we're not making that selection process more thorough. So
Roxanne's got a question, which is, what is contact centre average attrition for less than 1 year?
Well, the less than 1 year part, I guess it would depend on the industry at the moment. And again, this is where kind of the state of the economy plays a part in attrition. So in times of boom, we often find that attrition will go up because people can find it easier to get another job. And in times of recession, the attrition level will potentially go down because people have got not many other options on the table. But at the moment, it's roughly around 20 to 25% in the UK. So you can have a think. But and I've put some stats in your workbook on this on the bottom of page 4, which you know, there are examples of contact centres that have got it as low as 10%, but others that are as high as 45%. So again, it depends on your industry. Outbound tends to have higher attrition levels than inbound, because that can obviously be a bit more of a challenging role. So there's different nuances to it that you can take into account. But I think one of the best things is to measure your own year on year and to compare kind of with your own track record, and then think about another contact centre that's fairly close to you in terms of demographics and industry, and just see if you can compare notes with them. Good question. I've got a question for you now, if that's all right, which is the one thing you must do to avoid staff turnover headaches. What do you think it is? Do you think is the single most important thing that you need to do? And if you don't already do this, you know, you're going to start doing it today.
Waiting on a few answers, hopefully. Yeah, we've got Jonty typing and Andy, so we'll see what they say. Christine's typing as well. Jonty's just shared some research from Contact Babel about attrition, so we'll include that link in the email that I send out later. Christine said, truly understand where the breakdowns are today so that you can make changes.
Yeah.
And Andy said, would you count, oh, it's a question, sorry. Would you count staff moving to another department in your attrition rate?
No, I wouldn't. So when we're talking about attrition, we're talking about unwanted attrition. If they're staying within the organisation, then as far as I'm concerned, that's a success. And we're moving talent onwards and upwards, which is what we should be aiming to do. And I know that can be a bit of a sting for the contact centre, but I think it's great for the organisation as a whole, and we kind of have to think big picture about that. But one of the things I really advocate is the contact centre being that talent pool for the rest of the organisation. So if that's happening, I think give yourself a big pat on the back.
Yeah.
Okay, one thing we must do to avoid staff turnover headaches. Any other thoughts?
Caroline said, speaking to your staff to identify why people are leaving or considering leaving and come up with new processes to eliminate that reason if possible.
That's the one. Lovely. Thank you, Caroline. I will give you the fiver later. So yeah, exit interview and analysis of that data. So in your booklets on page 8, I have put a whole raft of exit interview questions that you can use. But having these conversations with people, either, as Caroline said, even better if they're thinking of leaving, and we can maybe stop that happening if we want to, but definitely when they hand in their notice, we want to be having an exit interview with them. So it's been massive in contact centres in recent years to look at Net Promoter Score. So Net Promoter Score is how likely would you be to recommend this organisation to your friends and family. And I would like us to be using Recruitment NPS in the contact centre. So when somebody works for you, how likely are they to recommend working there to their friends and family? And if they wouldn't want their mother or sister or partner to work in the contact centre, then we've got a problem. And so one of the things that we can do to avoid staff turnover headaches is find out what their bugbears, is it pay, is it the negativity that they deal with on the phones, is it that the job wasn't what they thought it was going to be when they first joined. We need to get to the root of that, and we need to be able to deal with that, because otherwise we will continually have a problem with churn and recruiting people just to keep coming on this treadmill and spitting them out the other end. And I know that we can't control our customers a lot of the time, and they will sometimes be, not nice people, but we can certainly support our staff in resilience training and giving them opportunities to come off the phones if they've had a really difficult call, and just make sure that we are giving them access to employee assistance programs and other things that we need to balance that out. And that's why we see lots of organisations saying, disrespectful behaviour towards our staff will not be tolerated. Your staff are not there to be abused. So do you have a good 3 strikes and you're out policy that they know how to use to terminate calls that are abusive? But definitely this is a source of data for you to really kind of look at what's going on in terms of attraction and retention.
Yeah, Kelly said we complete exit interviews with any leavers. And Jamie said we do them based on a form questionnaire provided by our HR team, and it's terrible. Perhaps something to redesign ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the things that can happen is it becomes a process that HR do. So we don't get any data back into the contact centre necessarily from that. HR report on it, and they're tracking, staff turnover levels and attrition levels more generally for the business perhaps. So definitely think about pulling in your own version of that into the contact centre. As a manager, if people are leaving my team, I want to know why. I want to take some responsibility for understanding that and what I can do about it. And again, I would want to be working, if I was the contact centre manager, with the HR manager to say, are we rewarding the team managers that hang on to their best performers? Because if we look at contact centre as a whole, sometimes we'll find that, I think I said this last week, people don't leave a job, they leave a manager. And that could be then I've got lots of advisors doing the same role, but I've got one team that's got massive churn. And I've got other teams that are hanging on to people for years and years. And that could be about differences in managerial behaviour, personality and performance. So I want to reward those managers that are holding on to those staff, because that's saving a lot of money for the business. And I want to understand what's going on with the manager that's potentially churning out. So, so definitely be thinking about that. Okay, so let's have a think about something else in relation to this, which is the really simple secret to having a happy team. So it'd be good to get thoughts in the chat room about what you think is the really simple secret to having a happy team.
Kelly's actually said, we also ask staff to complete a questionnaire twice a year called the 11 questions to identify areas of improvement needed in the research centre.
That sounds good. I mean, anything like that that's asking for their thoughts, ideas, opinions, feedback, it's so valuable. You know, employee opinion surveys and all that kind of stuff. We really want to be getting our hands on the data. And again, it's not just a process that HR owns and we get back some kind of high level figures for the business as a whole. I want to know kind of what's going on with the staff in the contact centre, and particularly with my team. So as much research as we can do, the better. I mean, one of the things that my company does is contact centre performance consultancy, and one of the first things we do is we go in and we get a group of advisors together and we say, tell us what your frustrations and your biggest challenges, what's the single biggest thing that's blocking you from giving great customer service. And they give us loads of stuff, and they'll quite often say, you know, nobody's ever asked us before. So you know, we're going back and doing all these reports, and all the senior managers are going, wow, that's fantastic. And we're going, well, just ask your people. You know, it's all the information is there for the taking, and they're the experts because they're the ones who are speaking to your customers and who are doing this all day and every day, and they can identify things that they would spend an absolute fortune on technology or consultants or whatever to solve. Just ask your people, you know. So yeah, I get excited about that because it's so easy. It's so easy to do, and it makes the staff feel good because it's like, wow, somebody's asking for my opinion, and I, you know, kind of get a break off the phone to actually talk about this. It's really good.
We've had lots of replies back from your simple secrets. Alistair says, be nice to them and don't treat them as beneath you. Christine said, it starts with the leaders. Roxanne said, treating them as you would expect to be treated. Kelly said, working with them as a team effort. Caroline says, recognising their achievements when they've gotten off a good call, when they've helped another agent. And Jamie says, listen to them and keep to your promises, which I really like.
Yeah. That's fantastic. All of that stuff is great, and I've cheated a little bit because I kind of going to encompass all of that under this one banner, which is around communication. So very much kind of what Jamie's saying there about listening to them and keeping your word is so important. I think people lose faith very quickly if they feel like that you're just paying lip service. So it's one thing for us to ask advisors, you know, what's your biggest bugbear, what's your biggest blocker? But if we then leave them with the expectation that we're going to take it away, we're going to remove it with a magic wand, and then 6 months go by and nothing has changed, you can see how that becomes quite frustrating and they lose faith in the management team. So it is about managing expectations to some extent and to keeping them in the loop and going back and say, look, we're still working on that, you know, it's legacy technology or it's budgets or it's not as easy as foreseen to change that for whatever reasons, but giving them as much information about that as you possibly can. So let's have a think about your communication strategy with your team. And again, please put into the chat room what you're currently doing to communicate with your team, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly. How does that work for you? What do you do with it? You know, I love to see team managers having daily huddles at the start of shifts with their staff. I can't stand it when I go into a contact centre and I can't tell who the team manager is because they're stuck behind their PC and they just blend in with everybody else. It's like, you know, they're just kind of focused on filling out emails and spreadsheets and stuff like that and not actually having eyeballs with people. So I say, you know, less emails and more eyeballs. I think it's really key, you know. So if you get information to cascade on from above, if you just forward in that via email and then the advisor isn't reading it and implementing it in the call, we wonder why. But it's because they haven't had the time or the motivation to read the email, and so they haven't implemented it. And that can actually be quite serious when it comes to something that's maybe a process change or, you know, kind of a data protection thing, or, you know, kind of a, you know, if you're in a regulated business. So it's certainly important to think about how we bring those messages to life. So definitely daily huddles I love. Weekly or monthly team meetings, but again, I'd like you to think about how effective they are, and if you have any challenges with those, definitely ask any questions about that you want to in the chat room, because one of the things I do as part of my consultancy work is I sit in, do kind of fly on the wall on team meetings, and I've seen some really shocking ones in my time where, you know, managers just kind of mumble through an agenda that has been sent down from above, and they read out kind of some updates, and it's like tumbleweed. Nobody asks any questions, and then they all go back, and they've just missed an opportunity to kind of engage people and motivate and build and bond the team, and it's just heartbreaking. And then I've seen other meetings where managers lose control because they've got a really lively bunch of advisors who just kind of take over. They're like, wow, we're off the phone and we've got cake and sugar and coffee. So it all just goes a bit wild for 20 minutes, and then, you know, nothing again really gets achieved, and then it's all back on the phones again. So definitely think about some structure to those meetings. I think is important, and again, I've put some stuff in your packs around what you might want to do to think about making that more effective. But I use kind of facilitation techniques that I would use in training courses in team meetings. So post-it notes and marker pens and flip chart paper, and getting people to list, you know, what's gone well for you this month, or what's been your biggest blocker, and to actually do it in a more structured format. I might use a track of music to time it and say, right, you've got 3 minutes, this track of music, to brain dump all the positives, and then let's do all the negatives, and then let's look at them all together and discuss them. Or get people to think in advance of the team meeting, and bring those ideas on a post-it note. So I give them a green post-it note and a pink post-it note and say, put all the positives on the green one and your negative for the month on the pink one, and then we put them on the walls, and we end up with a sea of green over here, and we can reward and congratulate and replicate those. And then the negative ones, kind of what could we do, and what can I take ownership, and what do you need to take ownership, or what training's coming out of that. So what that does is it creates a daily to-do list, which really gives you kind of focus for the coming month around what you need to pay attention to. And paying attention to individuals here is what I think a lot of you have been saying in the chat room as well, about, you know, making sure you're accessible and that you're connecting with them as individuals, that you're not above them. You don't walk through the contact centre on your mobile phone and not say good morning to anybody, and you actually make time for them and you connect with them as people. You ask after their kids, or how the weekend went, or how did you get on in that dance competition, or whatever it is you know that they were doing, what they're interested in. You're actually showing that. that you're listening to them, as Jamie said, and asking questions, and making sure you're praising people every day. We talked about that quite a lot last week. And making sure you're doing feedback as well, where it's adjusting feedback to recap on what's come out of your coaching sessions, and that you're championing the things that they've raised on those pink post-it notes last time, that you're really pushing through on their behalf. And I think even when they can see you've got your work cut out in the bigger organisation, I think that still makes them feel like you're trying for them, and that's really important. And that you're coaching, so we again touched on that quite a lot last time, but asking questions rather than telling people what to do goes a really long way. But I'd be interested in your thoughts as well, so any other things that you think are key. I think certainly when it comes to a good team manager, it should be people first and numbers and tasks second. I know you still have to kind of do call listening at your PC, and you probably still have to do some shift allocation stuff and reply to emails and track KPIs and stuff that requires you to be at your desk. But first and foremost, the role should be about the time that you've got to spend with people. And if you feel like you're not being allowed to do that, even when you want to do that, again, that's maybe a conversation to be having with your manager as well, so that culturally we can think about removing some of those administrative tasks and freeing you up to do what you will do best, which is facilitating high performance from your advisors.
Yeah, Jamie asks, how can we organise daily huddles with different shift patterns? For us, it would require them 4 times a day if we did it as people arrived on shift. Doing it once the latest shift has come in may be too late in the day.
Yeah, so record yourself. So most people have got a smartphone or something like that, and you can make a 2-minute video of morning or afternoon or evening if it's the night shift. It's Jamie here, I'm just checking in with you. I hope everything's gone really well for you at home at the weekend and whatever. What's the update that you would have perhaps put in an email? Do it to a video, and then just email that, give them the link, or share it if you've got a Yammer site or something that you use, share it with them that way. And I think people are kind of getting more used to doing contact through video, and it's certainly something we want to be evolving into our contact centres as another support channel ultimately. So think about how you might use that, and then you get to do the huddle with your out of hours teams even when you're not there. Other ways of doing it can be just to kind of grab them when they first come in, so they might make a cup of tea in the kitchen, so you go into the kitchen at the same time and have that conversation. So for the ones that you're physically able to kind of grab and be there for, then do that. And then with others, you might just have to get a little bit more creative about the way in which you're doing it. But it's just giving them that feeling that you're thinking about them, you're cheering them on. It's the start of a new shift, and we want to set them up in the right frame of mind, feeling motivated for that.
Fab.
Great question. I know it can be difficult. I work with managers who haven't seen their out of hours team for a year, which again I kind of encourage and question and say, well, maybe you could drop in and see them, because that is also important. But get creative with the technology. Okay, let's have a think about induction and induction horror stories, and I'd like to know what your induction horror stories might be. So if you've had either a negative induction experience yourself in a job, or if you think that there's been some induction horror stories in your contact centre, I'd like to hear what those are. There are things that seem to get repeated in contact centres all over the world that absolutely horrify me, and are quite simple to fix really if we put a bit of thought into it. So I'd be interested to hear what those are for you.
No, at my last business, they had just changed over their software on the first day that I arrived to Office 365, and everything was going wrong. So we just kind of me and another new starter kind of sat in the corner just reading the website all day because there was nobody really to tell us anything else. They were all busy panicking.
Oh, it's awful. That's kind of like I once went to a job where I was given a big, massive folder of policies to read. So yeah, that was an exciting day of my life that I'll never get back. Yeah, it didn't start things off well, I have to say. But I think, in contact centres, it depends quite often whether we're recruiting in like ones and twos if you're a small contact centre versus if you're able to recruit in a decent sized group, kind of group that and make your activity kind of 6 or 10 or whatever, so that you've got a cohort that you can train together and they bond together as a little team, and that's really nice. That works well. I know for the ones and twos it's much more difficult in that way, but sitting and reading a website or a procedure manual is not fun, and you don't learn anything like that. It's like saying, I know I'm going to teach you, Rachel, to ride a bike. Here's a book. Sit and read the book. Oh, and maybe I might have a video for you to watch of someone else riding a bike. But that's not going to help you to ride the bike, is it? You need to be able to sit on the bike yourself and feel what it feels like and practice and find your own balance. So, yeah.
Yeah, Kelly said our old induction style was a lot of reading for the staff, which was very boring for them.
Yeah. And it's that. Then the next thing from that is passive call listening. And this is one of the things that contact centres seem to think works. The whole sitting by Nelly, I know I'm going to sit you here, give you a second headset and let you listen to Carolyn taking calls. And Carolyn's been doing this for 10 years and he's doing it at high speed and he's flicking through all these screens and asking all these technical questions and using all this jargon, and this new person's going, I'm not even following what's going on. I'll just give up after half an hour and start thinking about what I'm going to have for my tea because this is just pointless. And at worst it can scare them off because they think, oh my goodness, I'm never going to be that good. I'm never going to be able to do this. This is way more difficult than I thought. And then they don't come back tomorrow. So we've wasted all that time in that recruitment phase as well. So it's sitting by Nelly is not fun.
Yeah, Jamie said new employees not being announced to the company, so people being questioned who they are and why they're in the office without a visitor pass.
Oh no! Yeah, that's not fun, is it? That's going to make you feel really special on your first day. Yeah, and that's like when you don't give them the pass that allows them to go to the toilet, and they have to say, I need the loo, and borrow somebody else's, and yeah, that's horrendous. Which is what I put a little bit of story and background in about Stacey. So you've got Stacey's story on page 4. This is a real, true story, and there are some things in here that really draw out the mismatch with the psychological contract. So certainly think about where you're doing your interviews in relation to where the person is going to ultimately work. Because what happened in this case was that she was interviewed in a beautiful office environment with glass lifts and water fountains and potted plants. And then actually when she started working in the contact centre, it was a different building, scruffy kind of prefab thing out the back that was where she was going to be based. So straight away you've got that kind of moment where they go, what? This isn't kind of what I had in my head. So that straight away is a jar on the psychological contract. And just little touches like, not having the pass ready for them, the headset doesn't work, kind of it's not what I thought it was going to be. What? I have to work one weekend in 4? Nobody mentioned that to me in the interview. So this is where kind of things that were in my psychological contract are now being breached, and that's what can cause people to leave. And then when we add into that kind of a boring induction, which requires me to do, reading or, kind of passive listening, it's just not effective to how people learn. And again, I've put quite a lot of stuff in the pack about how to kind of jazz up your induction training and to think about things that you might do or your training team might do differently with that. But certainly some of the more kind of death by PowerPoint on the company history and all that kind of stuff, it's just not relevant and it's not helpful. And I think sometimes we get into a rut with induction training, particularly, like, you know, we've always done it this way for the last 20 years. This is how we've done induction, and it does need looking at regularly, and it does need a good shake up, and it does need advisors to give their feedback. So if you've got what you think is working well in terms of induction training, it'd be great if you can put that into the chat room and we can have a conversation about tips that you might have for other people. I've certainly seen some of my clients get it right and some not so well, and also kind of how well they treat those new starters. Are they seen as kind of, you know, welcome additions to the contact centre, or is it, oh no, please don't put them with me? Why do I always get the newbies kind of next to me to constantly asking me questions? So we need to think about what coaching support, floor walking access and all that sort of thing we've got in place for them once they leave the launch pad or whatever you call that as their kind of development area, and they go live on the phone, because that learning still continues for a number of months thereafter while they get calls that are more rare and unusual. You can't always plan for everything in training.
Yeah, Jonty said buddying up new employees can help them to settle in.
Yeah.
I just make sure I know at my last company to make sure that they have the same lunchtime. Otherwise, you know, it's all well and good having a buddy who, you know, you can sit and talk work with, but actually sometimes it's somebody to go off and show them where the lunchroom is and everything.
Yeah.
It's quite nice.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where kind of if you've got people who start together as a group, they often become quite good friends all the way through their employment journey, and they always remember that they were on induction together, and that can be quite nice. But certainly the trainer or the coach that's assigned to that group, I would hope, would really be looking after them for the first few weeks and making sure they know where everything is. And it's about making them feel wanted and welcomed. You know, it's I think people forget as well sometimes in recruitment that it's a two-way recruitment process, and they should be interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them, and you know, we should be glad that they've chosen to come and work for us. So we need to make that kind of come across in the preparation and the care and the attention that we give them. That's really key.
Sorry, we're having a redecorating.
Okay.
The sign has just fallen off the wall, so panic over. That was the large bang.
As long as it didn't fall on your head, Rachel.
No, it was fine.
Okay. Okay, so let's go through some induction essentials. So I have, like I say, put some things in your packs, and we've covered some of this as we've been chatting, but certainly this warm welcome, so making sure you've got a pass ready for them, that they are expected, people know who they are. I love that story of, you know, who are you? You've not got a visitor's badge on. So we definitely want a warm welcome. We want them to feel like we've put some thought and we've prepared for their arrival, and that we make their induction fun and interesting and interactive and memorable and useful, so it actually focuses on the things that they need to know, not kind of what the company did 200 years ago necessarily. That we do a phased release in terms of going live onto the phones. We don't just kind of want to dump them on there and that's it. We might let them start to take some calls with some support, then bring them back into the classroom and debrief what's gone well, what did they find challenging, let them learn from each other in terms of those experiences as well. Giving them this ongoing support, so this is where your floor walkers or your coaches or your buddies are really key, but also for you as a team manager, making sure that you're checking in with them especially, and that they feel that you're looking out for them, and that you're sitting down with them and having regular reviews, making sure that it is matching up to expectation and that they feel comfortable and confident. And it just sets that tone from the beginning about the relationship between the two of you, and being a very open one, and that they can talk to you about anything at any time. And that we're backing this up with clear documented training plans. So if they're saying, actually, you know, I am really struggling on this resilience piece, I'm finding it really draining and difficult, and it's really affecting me when I go home. I don't want to talk to my family because I've been verbalizing all day. Then we need to think about, you know, what might we be able to do to help them with that. But also thinking about the whole team. There's a model which I haven't got time to cover today, and some of you might have heard of it already anyway, which is Tuckman, and it's the model of forming, storming, norming, performing. So it basically means when a team forms, that quite often they go through a bit of a storming phase where everyone's kind of finding their own place and sussing each other out, and it can feel a little bit kind of uncomfortable, and not everyone understands everybody, so there can be some disagreements. And then they settle down, and that's the norming, and then they start to work really well together, and that's the performing. And I think what people sometimes forget is that when we bring in a new starter to an established team, it can often press the reset button that puts the whole team back to the beginning of that cycle. So it's not unusual for it to cause a little bit of unrest, or, you know, kind of suspicion, or, you know, people can find it distracting when a new starter joins a team. So it's making sure that you're giving that new starter support, but you're not neglecting the rest of the team, and they start to get jealous or resentful or whatever with that too. So do continue to think about the whole team as well during that process. And if anyone's got any stories or examples or thoughts or questions around kind of how it affects team dynamic, then again, pop that into the chat room. And while we're thinking, yeah, go Rachel.
Yeah, no, it was just to give you a bit of a time warning that we're about 5 minutes away from the end.
Okay, that sounds about perfect timing, because all we're going to do now is the final 6 tips on what you need to do to be the team leader that everybody wants to work for. So if you've got your thoughts about what you think works well, then again, pop those into the chat room. And there's some space in your workbook for you to capture the key points. And we've covered quite a lot of these as we've gone along. So tip 1 is showing genuine concern. So we've talked about, you know, kind of recognizing people by name, asking after their weekend, their family, you know, getting to know them as individuals and remembering that and what's important to them. The second one is about being accessible, which again we've talked about, making sure that people know from the beginning when they work for you, they can come and talk to you about anything, and making sure that you are setting time aside for eyeballs, not just emails, and that you are humble and you're not above them. I think somebody said in the chat room that was really important, so that was good. The third one was around knowing what motivates you as an individual, so what do you like to do in your job, and also what motivates each person that works for you in your team, because motivational incentives are a very personal thing, and this is something to think about when you're putting things in the reward cupboard that we talked about last time. You might just kind of work from your own frame of reference and what motivates you, and that might not be what motivates other people in your team. So ask the question about what would motivate them. Tip number 4 is about topping up your own self-esteem as well. So when you go on an aeroplane and they say if there's a drop in cabin pressure, fit your own oxygen mask before helping anybody else. And so to be a really great team leader that people want to work for, you've got to have your own oxygen mask on. So you've got to feel good about yourself, confident about what you do, enjoy where you work, and be a great role model, so that you're there as kind of a positivity source, rather than think, oh God, I've got to be at work again today. And it's like, you're the managing director, come on. You know, you've got to lead by example. Number 5 is about how you empower your people. So this is again thinking about, you know, the bugbears, the things that are making them bang their head against a brick wall. How can you remove those and give them the empowerment that they need to be able to do the best job that they want to do? So that's really important. And the last one is that you encourage transparency. So, you know, if there are things that you can't change, you know, that are non-negotiable, then, you know, that is how it is, and we'd all love to change certain things, but for whatever reasons we can't, then it's about being really clear and really honest about that. And if you're working on something, like we said before, just keep giving feedback as to, you know, I know it's not great, this is what we're doing about it, and keep giving those updates and being very transparent in what you're doing. And I think people really respect that. Like I said before, they just feel like you're trying for them at least, which goes a long way.
Yeah.
This is your, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, Christine said lead by example as her suggestion.
Yes, excellent. Yeah, it is about that. So certainly this is your action plan for thinking about what you're going to do between now and next week. So definitely think about the 4 mistakes that we covered at the start. So think about your recruitment activity and go through some of that data. Think about who owns it. Is it you or is it HR? What's the business case for doing things differently or spending more money on salaries in order to save money in attrition? Think about the amount of two-way communication with your team. So that needs to be at a one-to-one and at a team level. So think about your experiences of induction. Have you actually gone through the induction that your advisors go through? What's that like? What's the feedback from induction? Do you ever see that, or does that go to HR? And then review those 6 tips and choose at least 3 to focus on even more over the coming weeks. And at the start of next week's call, I will again be asking you what you've implemented, what you've reflected on, and what's working for you in relation to the recruitment and induction piece.
Fab. Well, we've reached 2 o'clock. We'll stay online for a bit afterwards, so if you do have any questions, please just keep asking. So our next session is next Tuesday, the 2nd of February. Carolyn, what are we going to be covering?
We're going to be covering leadership secrets next time. So that's where we're going to, we touched a little bit on your personality in the interview process. We don't want to recruit clones of you. And so next week we're going to be digging into that even more and thinking about maybe what might be some of your blind sides and what might be some of the things that you personally might be able to work on, and what are the secrets that every contact centre leader and manager needs to know.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I think we're going to end the video now, but thank you everyone for joining us, and see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.